Well, hello, Kepler families, and welcome to another live with one of our wonderful teachers. And the wonderful teacher today is Angelyn Dodson. Welcome, Angelyn.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Cool, great. Yeah, I'm excited about the whole year. I'm excited about this conversation. And I might even be excited about Intro to Grammar and Composition and Intermediate Grammar and Composition. So you're teaching 4 classes this fall at Kepler. And looking at your teacher profile, you are the sort of woman to keep yourself quite busy. You have a lot of volunteer work that you do. One of the things that you do is work at a local food bank, and I found it very interesting that on your teacher profile, the note really isn't so much about the wonderful good that it does to help people at a food bank, which I know is your big motivation, I'm sure. But the reason given is that you love food. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your love for food and how that has influenced your volunteer work.
Well, I love food so much, and I want the rest of the world to be able to enjoy it and love it along with me. And that's why I want to do what I can to help make sure everyone else has the chance to love it as much as I do. I love food so much that when I started my higher education career, I was actually a culinary arts major at my local community college for one
Hmm.
year. And I use that against my mom a lot when I'm cooking. I'll tell her I'm the one with a culinary arts background, even though truthfully, I didn't take a single culinary arts class. I only took gen eds
Oh, wow.
because I hadn't gotten to it yet. But then I took an ethics course, which totally changed my mind on what I wanted to be studying. But yes,
Hmm.
I really do love food. I love eating it, cooking it, and I want to make sure that I can do what I can to help other people enjoy it as well. So
Oh, that's great. That ethics course can't have been that good though, if it still allows you to pull that trick on your mom.
well,
Well, yeah.
probably the professor of that ethics course would agree with you that it was not a great course.
Okay, fair enough.
He
Well, yeah,
was
I remember my community college experiences as well. I guess we can leave it at that. But I am curious also about the whole food and love for food and food bank thing, all that coming together. Does it come together as well and with your family? Because you come from a large family.
I do. I do come from a large family. My mom's Italian. If you know anything at all about Italians, you know that they feed everyone all the time. So my mom is an excellent cook, and we have family over a lot. We cook a lot. We definitely gather around our table quite a lot.
Hmm.
So it's been a
There's
pretty big
nothing.
part of my life.
Yeah, that's really pretty fabulous. I love thinking about a large Italian family eating. Uh, there's nothing Italian about me, but the thought of gnocchi just makes me so happy. Whenever I want to feel happy, I think about gnocchi. Just letting you know.
That's a very, very happy thought.
It is,
And
isn't it?
you would have, really is. And you'd have to try my mom's lasagna sometime. It is just bar none the best. Nothing
Okay,
compares.
I'm headed for Pennsylvania. Well, you also work as you're getting your master's now at Faulkner. You're teaching for Kepler. You have taught elsewhere, but I also saw that you have worked as a private tutor. As someone who most of my educational career I spent in one-on-one situations. So I find the idea that you've been working as a tutor and been maintaining that, not just as something you might do when you're a junior in college, but as something that you take seriously and do for a prolonged time. Talk to us a little bit about your tutoring career and why you do it, why it might be satisfying.
Well, there are two main reasons why I've continued the one-on-one tutoring. The first is that my undergrad major was English and philosophy. And I don't know if you know anything about getting certified to teach in Pennsylvania, but it's very, very tough to do if your undergrad major was not education. And I've learned that
Hmm.
the hard way. I knew I didn't want to be an education major, but I did know I wanted to teach. And so the certification process has been a little difficult. I'm working on it, but so I'm not technically a certified teacher, so I couldn't get a job in a public school right now. Um, but really, the main reason I've stuck with it is because I really do find it incredibly effective. It, I have done work with a literacy program, and one of my students said to me one day, "I wish I had had a teacher like you in high school. I wouldn't have had an issue. I would have my high school diploma right now." And I told him, I thanked him. That was very flattering, but I said to him also, that's not really quite fair to your teachers, because when you and I are sitting here working, I can immediately detect what your specific issue is. We can address it right away. We can correct it immediately. It's totally tailored to your needs. And
Hmm.
every student is such a different learner. And so if a teacher has a class full of 30 students, I can imagine that it's very, very tough to keep up with every one of them and to make sure that you're doing the absolute best for each student. So I really do think there's a benefit to the one-on-one interaction. It's been really effective in my experience. It's been really good for my students. And it's just been, that's when it's good for your students, it's good for the teacher, because it's
Of
rewarding and it's
course.
meaningful, and it gives you reason to continue doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. And that's 30 student thing, which, I think most Kepler families, won't have to be convinced of the
Yeah.
of how bad that can be for students. But, that is a reason Kepler classes are capped at 12. Many teachers even choose a lower cap so you can have that more tailored experience. But nothing quite beats the tailoring of some one-on-one work.
Definitely.
So you're teaching a couple of grammar courses, and viewers can go ahead and see the 4 classes that Ms. Dodson is teaching this coming term. 2 grammar courses, one for grades 7 through 9 and then one for grades 10 through 12. Could you talk to us a little bit about those classes?
Yeah, all of the classes I'm teaching are fairly fundamental. Nothing really groundbreaking, nothing too specific. And that's because I really believe in the fundamentals. I really believe that the heart of education is learning how to think, not facts, not memorization. And that's something that I find so interesting about grammar, is that it looks like a bunch of sort of rules that you have to memorize, but really I find it to be this system that's like so beautifully organized that you can't help but have your thinking impacted by it. It's, like I said, it's a system. And I think that when we can see really like at the nitty-gritty level how it all works together, and how, smaller pieces build into bigger pieces, and sort of that whole depends on the parts, but the parts only make sense in terms of the whole. When you see that, at least in my experience and in my opinion, I think it really it helps sort of organize our own thinking. And I think that it's something that can be applied to any subject, any task, any specific interest that you have. So to me, it's a lot more than just the way that words need to be placed in a sentence, or, whatever it is. It's really about learning to organize your thoughts into a cohesive whole,
Mm.
so that it's really as beneficial as possible.
Yeah, and it makes sense with laying it out that way, that the
Hmm.
intro to grammar and composition is for the logic phase of the student. And the way you're talking about grammar, it kind of brings out something that was in your teacher profile. You have a secret, and when it's a secret love, usually when it's a secret love, it's also a very passionate love. So a secret love for algebra. So
I do.
you're a language teacher and a grammar teacher. What's up with this algebra thing?
Honestly, math is actually my favorite thing to teach, because it's so, probably anyone who's like a math-minded person would not like me saying this, but it's so black and white. So
Mm.
I know immediately if my students know and they've gotten it, and that gives me so much satisfaction. But also, I don't know if you can tell this from the way I'm talking about grammar, I love organization. That is
Mm.
so aesthetically pleasing to me. And math makes so much sense. They call it, a language for a reason. It's so orderly. It makes so much sense. And so it's very, very satisfying for me to do it. And it's very satisfying for me to help other students do it, because I know immediately if they've gotten it.
Mm.
It's a little different when I'm working with a student, on essay writing. I can't, there's only so far I can sort of coach and guide that. And there's only so far I can, prepare you maybe to take an in-class test that will be an essay.
Yes.
But to prepare you for a math test, I know if you know how to solve a one-step equation, how to solve a quadratic equation. I know if you know that. And so maybe it's a little bit of a lazy thing for me that I just like, that I know we're good.
Yeah.
But
Well,
on the flip side, that's why I also love language, is that little element of surprise or mystery, or not always being 100% sure. So.
Well, I think it's really interesting that you bring up essay writing, because as you were talking about organization, one of my thoughts was that these aren't just grammar courses that you're offering; they're grammar and composition courses.
Yeah.
And certainly, I think that one of the struggles that as you move out of logic into rhetoric, one of the struggles, there are a lot of students who can master a good sentence or a pretty phrase, but then the organizing of a whole is also a big part of it's an integral part of being able to write effectively. And I've in my experience, a lot of students struggle with that. Right, they can turn a pretty phrase, but then organizing an entire essay, an entire paper, can be a difficulty for them.
Yeah, like you said, I'm a private tutor. I've worked with K through 12 students. I've worked with public school students, private school students, even homeschooled students. So I've worked with a variety of minds, and I have found almost every one of them struggles to write an essay. And a lot of times there's a lot of really good material in the essay. I can tell what they're trying to say. Their facts are good. The research is good. There's no misspellings or anything like that, but it'll be really disorganized. And I think that is reflective of disordered thinking. And that's why I think you really do have to get back to the fundamentals. And that's why I think you need to start with grammar and organize your thoughts both in your head and on the paper. And I think that then leads to a much more organized whole when you get to the essay writing process.
When you talk about going back to basics, that brings to mind a line in your teacher profile. I believe that reading comprehension is the secret to all learning. If you're able to understand critically what you've read, all the knowledge in the world is at your fingertips. Then fact-based teaching is mere memorization. You mentioned the true art of learning lies in the ability to link ideas together. Maybe you can talk about the importance of, so you're not teaching, you have an intro to literature, but with the other three courses, it's grammar, it's language, and then I want to talk about the intro to literature course shortly, but maybe talk about critical reading in all spheres, critical reading in your Latin and grammar and composition courses.
A lot of times I find that the students I've worked with will read maybe a passage from a history textbook, and they've got to answer a few questions on it. And if it's a simple question like, what year did this war end? They can skim the text and say, oh, it ended 1864, whatever it was. But when it gets beyond that, when it's maybe, what were the effects that this war had on the South versus the North, if we're talking Civil War? And those aren't the kind of things that are right there in the textbook. When the war ended, the South faced this struggle, this struggle, this struggle. If that's not right in the text, I find that a lot of students I work with are like, I don't know, they don't even know where to begin. And so that's what I mean by saying you need to learn to link the ideas together. Maybe it's not blatantly apparent, in the same wording, but you can pick through and see later on, oh, there was a lot of property damage. That's something that they would have to deal with at some point, And so while I do believe that there is a time and a place for learning important facts, dates, figures, events, of course, that's sort of like, in my opinion, if you want to feed a person, you can give them a fish, but if you want to feed them, I'm totally butchering the phrase, for a lifetime, you teach them how to fish.
I think you nailed it. And that's a teacher go-to line.
I want my students to leave my class or leave the session with me and feel empowered to go way beyond what we covered. And if I can help them learn how to read critically, they can study anything they want, not just what they have to learn because of what's in the curriculum in their particular school. And I want them, if they don't feel so confined by what they have to learn, I think that they'll learn to enjoy learning a lot more. And I want them to enjoy learning. I want them to be able to learn. I want them to be able to learn independently because I won't always be there, or whatever teacher
Right.
they have won't always be there. And I find so much inherent value in education. I have never in my life viewed it as a stepping stone. You know, like if I do well in high school, I'll get into a good college. And if I get into a good college, I can get a good job. It's to me, it's so much more than that. And I want to share that with my students. And I think part of the reason they view it that way is because that's often how it's presented,
Yes.
not even just in terms of its, sort of teleological nature, but even the way they learn. A lot of times, specifically in public schools, from what I can see of their curriculums, it is so much memorization. A
Hmm.
lot of times, a teacher will even give them a study guide that's identical to the test. There's no learning done there. That's robotic. It becomes robotic, and it's educate knowledge is so alive to me, and I want it to be alive to my students. I want it to be so much more interactive, not just
Yes.
like them as a sponge soaking something up, but them learning to go back and forth, to reflect, to respond, to turn something over in their mind, for it really to land with them and mean something to them.
Yeah, when people have asked me over the years, I homeschooled when I was in high school, and now we homeschool our kids. And as I've had occasion to have many conversations about why homeschooling, and
Yeah.
thinking about the government schools, the most they can do and the most they can hope for in the formation of a young person is to produce a good worker or a good citizen, and those are good things. But I want my children to be good humans, which would mean Christ-like. But
Absolutely.
that human formation is what education is about, and it will encompass those other things automatically. So setting that bar low to where the best you could be is a okay. I am here. Is Angelyn here? I think. Oh, there she
I'm
is.
here.
Hi, Angelyn. I'm
I don't know what
sorry. I
happened.
think the trouble
Hi.
was on my end.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was me. I actually hopped on a whole other. There's a church next to us, and I just jumped on their Wi-Fi because I'm
Okay.
not sure what happened to ours. Uh, I'm very sorry about that.
No worries.
But I did want to ask kind of a little follow-up question there about critical reading, and of course, here we are. We're classical educators. So we obviously are going to believe that critical reading is a necessary part of a fulsome education. But how do you learn how to read critically? Do I need to take a class on critical reading? Putting you
That's
on the spot, huh?
that is tough. No, it's something I think about a lot because it's something that's important to me. I think from a young age it needs to be introduced, and I think that it needs to be I think reading needs to be a lot more present in students' everyday lives.
Mm,
Um, I don't think you'll disagree with me when I say that books are few and far between these days. They're especially with, so many different screen options.
hmm.
Um, I think there's only so much a teacher can do actually, and I do think it's something that needs to be addressed at home more. I think that screen time needs to be limited and that reading needs to be a lot more than it currently is. I think that's how you learn to read critically is by reading and reading good stuff, reading difficult stuff, reading challenging books that force you to think. And reading, and this is again, I can't force a student to do this. I can ask a student to do it, but reading in an engaged manner, not zoning out and just reading to finish that page or to finish that chapter, but reading and attempting to understand what you're reading, attempting to glean something from it. So
Hmm.
I think it's sort of, it takes a village. I think at
Hmm.
home, it needs to be addressed a little bit more. It needs to be something that's encouraged much more. That's something I'm really grateful to my parents for. They're huge readers and they always encourage that in us. So I think screen time needs to be limited and reading needs to be much more encouraged, especially from a young age. And as I said, I think students need to make that effort to be very, very engaged and to really try to do the difficult work, because there are a myriad of works that really are really difficult to read, difficult to get through. I wouldn't deny
Yes.
that, but I think if they understood and appreciated the benefit that comes from that effort, then
Hmm.
maybe it would be a little bit more pleasant for them to do it.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right on in talking about the responsibility of the families. And, I think most of the families for whom Kepler would be on their radar screen at this point, um, would wholeheartedly agree with that. But, if they've interacted with, other schools and, there's often with schools or government schools or other educational entities, there's often sort of this the families have to struggle against the institution to
Mhm.
retain their ability to influence their children and their rights to do that, because
Absolutely.
a lot of institutions really believe that you're handing over the education of your children to them. So it's built
Mhm.
into our philosophy, just really baked in, that the families are responsible and we're here as a resource to them. We empower the teachers, we empower the families. So that's, I think it's important that we're philosophically in line with that, and that's what we want to do, is
Yeah.
make the families uh, to empower their responsibility. So you're talking about critical reading being sharpened, being deepened through reading, which I suppose would mean that we should be reading good books and good books often. Perhaps even not just good books, but great books, which leads us into your final course, Intro to Literature, Great Books. And, in perusing this course, if people, click on the link below to your teacher profile, they'll see that this course doesn't have a book list. Instead, there's a certain curriculum so some textbooks that would be purchased. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that curriculum and why you chose it.
It is the Great Books sort of junior program. I don't know if you're familiar with the Great Books of the Western World, which
Mm-hmm.
is the set used at Faulkner in their master's program, the program I'm in. And my undergrad was English and philosophy, so I've been reading these works for a few years now. I've been reading the greats, Plato, Aristotle, Augustine. Those are some of my personal favorites, but you name it. And I wanted to use this curriculum because I'm going to pick and choose things from it. And I'm actually not 100% decided on some of it because I'd like to see sort of where my students' interest is
Mm.
as we get into the course for a few weeks. Because, like I said, I want it to be enjoyable for them as well. I don't want it to be total drudgery all the time. So I want to see what sort of my students' more specific interests are, so we can tailor our reading list as we go on. I'm going to start with a few things, of course, but I really, like I was just talking about with critical reading, I want students from a younger age, not just in college, but before that, I want them to be familiar with reading these great texts. The text, you know, like some of the authors I mentioned, Plato, Aristotle, even as you move towards uh, more contemporary authors, you get to like Tolstoy, who I love, or Fitzgerald, who I also love. These are great texts because they have withstood the test of time. They're not, they haven't lost relevance. They're these sort of like overflowingly abundant works with so much in them to learn from and really to be changed by. Literature is so incredibly influential, I think. And so I want students, not that they would be younger students, these are, middle school, high school students, but I do want them to be introduced to these really great classic works before they're in college.
Mm-hmm.
And also, from a Christian perspective, I think often literature deals with some more difficult themes, some more mature themes, and I want my students to be able to appreciate the, creative, the artistic abilities of an author, or a writer or a thinker, or whoever it is, while remaining Christian in their approach. I went to a secular university after I graduated high school, and so my introduction to the great books
Mm.
was really not what I wanted it to be. I'd like to give students sort of a different side of the great books before they would enter a university that maybe is secular, maybe not.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to think about your approach to teaching these, and I love that you want to be having this large curriculum gives you the ability to be responsive to your students and finding out what the
Yes.
class is into. But from your experience, and I'd love for you to answer this philosophically, but I'm particularly interested in your experiential answer. From your experience, how important is it that the teacher be teaching works that she loves, as opposed to being responsive to the students? And I don't want to put those in. I just said as opposed to. I shouldn't have said that. But it is a different take, right? So the teacher loves certain works. How important is that?
It's hard for me to answer that, because when it comes to literature or philosophy, or even, like we said before, math, there's really not that much that I don't love when it comes to education. So it's very hard for me to find something that I can't enjoy at least a little bit, especially when it comes to reading. Now, I will say Hemingway, can't do it, So
I'm with you on that one.
It's very dry. So I really haven't thought about that. I think that's an interesting question. I think, of course, what the teacher, loves and is passionate about, that very much comes through. But I also don't want to be so big-headed as to think that there's nothing worthwhile that I'm not passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to
Yes.
share with them. I'd like to give them as well-rounded of an approach as I can, even if it's maybe not my favorite thing.
Which is
but
why
again,
you
like I
value
said,
being responsive to the students, because sometimes
yes,
it's not your favorite thing, and that's great.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, I can dig that for sure. Well, Angelyn Dodson is teaching grammar and composition, both an introduction for the logic phase, and then intermediate grammar and composition, introductory Latin, and then intro to literature, great books this very fall. We're looking forward to having you on board, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us.
Thank you. It was so fun.
Daniel Fukushan endorses the table of contents for the curriculum you've chosen, and stay on the line after we say goodbye to everyone, and we can chat a little bit after the stream. Angelyn, thanks again, and thanks everybody for watching. So long.